Ooh, 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 ooh. This is going to be so good. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Sister Queen. How are you doing?
Good evening. I am well. I am excited. How are you?
I am so stoked about this one, and I know that's always how we open these. I'm excited about anything that we're bringing from the Lived Black Experience Project. We've been away for a little while, but we are back, and the topics that we have coming up in the next few weeks. Are really, I think, are going to be very revealing, very eye opening, very enlightening as always, and that's what we strive to do here. So, again, good evening, LBE community supporters, accomplices. We are so grateful to be back and to be in this space and to welcome back. I just There are resident presenters, our resident community dialogue presenters. And so, with that being said, Sister Kara, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I will see you on the back end. This is going to be so good,
Yes, ma'am.
so good.
All right. Well, good evening, community, and welcome back to another live LBE session. As you can tell, we are very excited for this one. It is timely, it is an important conversation, and it is reminding our community what we are here for. It's to have these hard and heart conversations about things of importance that are happening in our world. So tonight we are talking about America's fascination with Barbie. You can see from the title on the screen that it's going to be a very good conversation. And it is my honor to introduce or reintroduce many of you to two of our frequent and some of my favorite collaborators in this series, Dr. Treya Allen and Dr. Mary Roaf. Dr. Allen is the DEI focused instructional support coordinator for the Office of General Education at the University of Arizona and a faculty member at Pima Community College. Her research covers the intersection of Black women in education, specifically higher education. She is the curator of underground retention programs, Auntie Networks, and most recently, the developer of an African American Studies program at Pima Community College. Welcome, Dr. Allen. We also welcome back Dr. Mary Roaf. Dr. Roaf is currently an associate professor and chair of ethnic studies at Stanislaus State. She completed her PhD from Temple University in applied anthropology and is a critical scholar whose teaching and research examine social inequities in K through 12 and higher education. Dr. Roaf's scholarly agenda includes transnational, decolonial, Black feminisms, and global Black social justice activism. Her achievements include being awarded the 2021 to 22 Elizabeth B. Papageorge Award in teaching and her selection as a 2023 Fulbright Hays Fellow in South Africa. Welcome, Dr. Rowe, and I hope I pronounced the name of that award correctly. I will turn it over to both of you, and we look forward to this conversation.
All right, dear sis, we at it again.
Sister Tria, we're back. We're frequent flyers. Hello,
Yes, okay.
hello, LBE community. Dr. Tria and I jumped on this opportunity to just weigh in and share some of our observations and insights and analyses about the cultural phenomenon that was the Barbie film this summer. I was just sharing behind the scenes with Sister Kara, Sister Tria, Sister Reverend Bernadine, that when I was in South Africa this summer, I the movie was released at that time, and I was seeing photo kind of lounge pink Barbie areas set up outside of movie theaters where patrons could take pictures. And I was seeing indigenous, right, South African women in full what's called Barbie core, which is the pink and even to the hair. And so this was not only a phenomenon in the US, it was also a phenomenon worldwide. And today we're really excited to share more of a critical social and cultural framing around the enduring appeal of Barbie and the original intent of the Barbie doll, which was really as an emblem of white supremacist patriarchy, and we'll get into why that is our argument that we're making tonight. Next slide, please. So it was really fascinating to look into the creation of the Barbie doll and the official launching of the Barbie doll as a toy marketed towards children in the US. And while the Barbie doll depicted here in the photo, I think it's interesting that one of the Barbies in the photo is brunette and one of them is blonde. And they both have on the black and white one-piece bathing suit. But it actually debuted in the US in, I think that should say 1959 at the American International Toy Fair held in New York City. And of course, the creator was a high-ranking, I think she was a VP in the Mattel company by the name of Ruth Handler, who I believe is played by Helen Mirren and makes an appearance, or someone depicting her makes an appearance in the Barbie film towards the end. I will say that I did not see the film, so this is not so much a critical analysis of the film itself. It's really more so about the enduring appeal of the Barbie doll in the US. Next slide, please. So this was definitely a village effort. We email each other kind of in a group format, like an email group chat, and I don't know if it was Bernadine or Kara or Sister Treya who sent a link about Barbie's origins as actually being created as a sex toy, as a novelty toy for adults, and really marketed towards adult German men in Germany in the early 50s, as you can see, not too long after the end of the World War II. And the Bill Lilly doll was actually based on a character in a comic strip that was just like a syndicated comic strip that was published in a newspaper in Hamburg, in Germany. And she was basically an escort. And so because of the popularity of this comic strip character, a doll was created and then sold and played as a novelty toy or as a sex toy, like in more adult establishments, such as places that sold cigarettes, alcohol, and the like. And Robin Gerber is the author that really gets into these salacious origins of Barbie, and in particular that the precursor to Barbie is a toy that's intended for adults and specifically marketed to cis men, right? Cisgender heterosexual men. So I think we really have to pause and make the critical connection of why has Barbie become this emblem of white supremacist patriarchy when the actual original prototype is one that was very, very specifically geared towards cisgender heterosexual men, their objectification and their commodification of women, right, through this syndicated comic strip series about a blonde-haired German escort. So next slide, please. So I really wanted to also, so that gives us the framing and making sense of why Barbie is an emblem of patriarchy. Literally is born out of kind of the most patriarchal um, conditions that we can imagine in relation to a toy that's not a blow up sex doll, but a miniature, right, sex doll. I also want to speak to the relevance and the salience of dolls, just dolls in and of themselves, and especially within a U.S. context, we're not going to talk about the dolls intended for more adult play, but the impact that they have on the socialization of children in the U.S. And this kind of really like dialectical dance between what are the prevailing messages that the larger society is disseminating constantly through a variety of means and is inculcating starting at the earliest ages of childhood by a myriad of means, and how children are able to reflect that this conditioning around white supremacy and in particular around anti-blackness itself. So it was the psychologist and the husband and wife PhD team, Dr. Kenneth and Mamie Clark, who conducted psychological experiments that became known in shorthand as the doll test in the 1940s, with Black children in particular, giving them the opportunity to choose between a white doll and a Black doll when it came to who did they associate with the most idealized traits, such as beauty, such as high character, such as intelligence. And the Black children repeatedly chose the white dolls when it came to the idealized characteristics in the series of doll tests. But then conversely, when it came to asking the Black children, pretty much ranging in age, but we're all in the elementary school range in terms of their ages, when they were asked which doll was ugly, which doll was scary, which doll did they not want to associate with, they overwhelmingly chose the Black doll. And these tests were actually used by the lawyers who were part of the legal team for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, who went to the Supreme Court and successfully argued that segregation in the U.S. And Jim Crow segregation of schools that were segregated by race in the U.S. this segregation was harmful to Black children. And this was the team that was led by Thurgood Marshall, and then it became known and is now known as the Brown versus Board of Topeka Education ruling of 1954, where the Supreme Court of the United States did rule to desegregate K through 12 public schools. And part of the argument was premised upon these doll tests. So I just wanted to really emphasize and foreground the critical importance of dolls, right? This is the critical importance of dolls in capturing in visual imagery and really this concentrated kind of template for not only children but adults to kind of project that underlying conditioning of white supremacy and anti-Blackness in really insidious and really pervasive and in largely what I would say subconscious ways. Next slide, please. So I just give a brief timeline. Sister Treya and I are going to go back and forth with the origins of Barbie in the U.S. Now, based on research, some cursory research that I was able to conduct, and I thought it was interesting that repeatedly the references I found characterized the first Black Barbie not as the first Black Barbie doll. I mean, as we can see here, there's just an example of some of the Barbie dolls, Black Barbie dolls from 1967 to 2021. But the way that the research characterized this as the first Barbie that was Black and that was named Barbie. I was so getting very specific in terms of the literal, okay, this was a Black Barbie doll that was also named Barbie. And this doll was created in 1980 by Kitty Black Perkins, who was Mattel's principal designer in 1978. Right, so it's the same company that Ruth Handler worked with and where Barbie was created. And so it took over 20 years for the company to release an actual Black Barbie. And I mean, in terms of the relationship of Black people and specifically, right, Black femmes, Black girls, Black women, the relationship to Barbie, it's really as an afterthought. The Black girl as the perennial sidekick, never the main heroine or main feature. And also as a money grab. I mean, as a money grab. So, and I think what I do want to pause here, and aesthetically, I think it's very interesting. The design of Barbie in 1968 and 1980 versus the other years, where I just remember as a child, I was a tomboy. I mean, I did have some access to Barbie dolls, but I wasn't that into them. My oldest friend, who we've been friends since we were 8 years old, she was a lot girlier than I was when we were children, and she was very into Barbies. I just like to use them to act out these really kind of wild and very dramatic, almost telenovela type stories. And I think it was because I used to watch soap operas, or what Miss Nettie used to call the stories. So I was just trying to recreate some of the soap opera drama that I was seeing. That was kind of the extent of it. But when I would see Black Barbies, I'm like, wow, this just looks like a white Barbie dipped in some chocolate. And I would say that with the exception of the Barbies in 1968 and 1980, and probably maybe some others. Next slide, please.
Oh, good sis. Can I jump in here really quickly?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Say something really quickly. That, when we were thinking about Black Barbies, we don't get the first one until 1978. Now, there was like a Christie, but Christie was not considered a Barbie doll at all. And her predate was like 1968. But the other thing that is like super important to point out here when you're talking about a Barbie dipped in chocolate is that literally until 1978, there were no Black resins or brown skin tone resins to actually make a Barbie doll. So what you got was, like, if you look at 1967, this is actually the British version of the doll. I think she's called Colored Janine. That's the actual doll's name. She was actually painted this brown skin color, right? But her features are very much reminiscent and almost identical. They are identical because she's just a painted Barbie doll, if you will, that was constructed with skin tones closer to our non-melanated brothers and sisters across the planet. So when we're saying like this timeline of Barbies, that it takes 20 years beyond the first creation of Bid Lily's little sister in America, literally 20 years, and we don't even get a Barbie who happens to be Black. We get something called a Black Barbie, who is then acknowledged as their name being Barbie. And so I think that's really important when we consider the question of like, what's the relationship between Barbie and Black women or Barbie and Black girls? Very much so, if you're looking at this timeline, immediately you should be like 60s, Black Power movement, 80s. What happened in the 80s? Like, what are the things that are happening there that would allow us? This 80s doll is reminiscent and builds off of a nostalgic understanding of what happened in the 60s and the 70s. Mm-hmm. Like that packaging for the first Black Barbie actually says, and it's on the screen, she's Black, she's beautiful, she's dynamite.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So it's not even built off of the mass consumption of Blackness around Barbies. It's really like the selling of Blackness packaged in a Black Barbie doll. So I just wanted to point that out before we go to the next slide.
Thank you, Sister Treya. Yeah, I was very excited to get to. Well, really, this is also like a critical pop culture analysis, very intersectional around obviously with in regards to race and gender. It's Barbie just has a very interesting hold on Black girls and women's imaginations. I will say that my actually my oldest friend, who, like I said, I mean, it was just um I grew up very close in age to my two younger brothers. We were very close in age. And so I was just sharing this with someone today that for the first 12 years I was socialized largely as a boy. Like I mean just and it had to do with birth order, and it was the me and my two brothers, and we were the three musketeers slash Tasmanian devils. So I was always outside. I was always being very physical. I was playing sports with them. I was riding bikes with them. I was getting into dirt and doing all kind, just the free range child with them. And I didn't like to be in the house, and our parents didn't want us to be in the house because we were tearing it up. Whereas my friend was quote unquote um a lot girlier, right? So she had the Barbie dolls, and it was my friend, her mother, her younger sister, and her father. So it was a house with one man and then all girls and a woman. And so I engaged with my imagination in different ways, but she spent a lot more time actually with playing with her Barbie dolls. And she is a Black woman as well. And she really was pushing for me. She's like, you have to go see this movie. You have to go see this movie. And I was like, well, I'll think about it. And I didn't get around to seeing it. So it's very nostalgic. And in addition to being nostalgic, it's being it's the capturing of the Black imagination is taking new forms when it comes to Barbie. Next slide, please.
Yes. Okay, as we go to the next slide, can I just say this? It is
Yes.
so interesting that you use the phrase imaginary, right? So Barbie is created by Handler as a way to hand down to her daughter an imagined future, right? So this fantastical playground that allows her daughter and to an extent Ruth Handler, because she was dealing with her own gender identity. Why can't women do X, Y, and Z in the 50s? Right? So she's handing this down as a toy, as a solution to create an imaginary world where girls can be more than just the gender roles in society. And what's very interesting about your use of that word is when we think about the imagination gap. Y'all remember when mermaids couldn't be Black? Like 6 months ago. Remember when Starfire from DC's like Titans couldn't be an alien? She was an alien. Starfire is an alien. Could not be a Black girl. Hermione Granger could not be Black, right? And so when we think about like Barbie and the juxtaposition of Barbie in the American society and our fascination with Barbie empowers us. Barbie is not empowering everybody, because in 2023, we got people talking about, well, Haley Bailey cannot be a Black mermaid because Black skin doesn't show up underwater. And so there's this gap here about any time that Black women, Black girls want to imagine themselves in various roles beyond what society has sometimes tried to box us into, that we absolutely refuse. There is no imaginary playground that is created intentionally in this line of dolls until we get a Black girl who is using her imagination and who pulls on the nostalgia of everything that makes her a Black girl, that we actually get a Black Barbie doll.
Oh, yes.
Sorry.
Oh no, I love this. This is why I keep showing up to to co-present with you, Sister Treya. And this is also bringing me to, I wonder what's, I think, interesting and what is a built-in contradiction in terms of the imagination gap that Ruth Handler was trying to fill with her daughter, is that she modeled the US Barbie off of a German sex toy. So this is where we get the impossible body proportions of the original US Barbie, but then it cannot actually have genitalia. So then this is where we see the difference between sexual norms, let's just say Europe as a whole, except for Victorian England and all of that, they inherited and sent across the pond. But I think it's really ironic, and it's so contradictory, and it's confusing, and it's conflictual for Ruth Handler to have been envisioning breaking the glass ceiling and grappling with that herself, despite her high-ranking position in the company that produces Barbie, but then doing it with a sex toy that then, in an ironic way, when we circle back around to the Black Barbie phenomena, especially when it comes to Black women rappers, there you can see from this image, and I'm simply showing kind of just 3 images, and to show that the way that Lil Kim, and we're going to go from Lil Kim to Nicki Minaj, are depicting their self-professed Black Barbiehood is actually more aligned with the original design and the original intent behind the German building, the German sex toy that Barbie is modeled off of. And I would say that this is, of course, Lil Kim comes onto the rap scene through her affiliation with the Notorious B.I.G. and with Puff Daddy. And so we're talking about the 90s into the early 2000s. She starts out as a brown-skinned young woman from New York. And over the course of really decades, she goes through many, many procedures and enhancements that are focused on, first on her features, her nose, her lips, and then increase her body. We can see in the middle here that, I mean, she's literally posed. She almost doesn't look human. She looks like literally a Black Barbie doll, even down to the blonde wig. And what's really interesting is her dimensions really do fit that original Barbie sex toy and the original US Barbie in terms of the enhanced breasts, the thinness. The waist is not, would be considered snatched. We don't see a lot, right, in the early 2000s in terms of the enhancement to the buttocks, which obviously is not in alignment, or it doesn't correspond with the white Barbie. But yeah, she literally looks like an inanimate object in that middle photo. Highly sexualized, as we can see in the first photo. This was a really infamous, it was a music award show, and Diana Ross was co-presenting with her in this lavender outfit, with the lavender wig, almost looking like a mashup of Barbie and a Smurf. I don't know. Talks about, and Diana Ross actually ends up putting her hand over Lil Kim's breast that has the pasty on it. Then at the far right, we can see this change. We can really start to see the change in her skin tone. But in terms of her actual physical body, the enhancements are actually very much look more similar to that original sex toy and later to the US Barbie than what we'll see with Nicki Minaj then coming in the mid 2000s, and picking up where Little Kim leaves off, as much as there's not a lot of acknowledge of that. And even in Lil Kim, in a song called The Jump Off, released in 2003, she has a line where that literally says Black Barbie dressed in Bulgari. So this association with beauty, this association with desirability, with wealth, and status, that is wrapped up in really interesting and important ways with that proximity to the beauty standard, which is the idolization of whiteness and white womanhood itself, and how getting as close or associating as close closely or affiliating as closely with these notions of beauty and desirability and status and wealth, right, is all playing out in these images and in this one lyric.
Can I add in here really quickly, because it's very interesting to me that you pulled this specific lyric. So if you are a Barbie collector or anything else, you know that the original intent behind Barbie was to like pass down different versions of womanhood. And Barbie becomes this all powerful, empowering, go girls go symbol, right? This socializing item in American society. She is supposed to be empowered. Now, the really interesting thing about this entire spread of photos is that I remember that award show when Lil' Kim wore this. The designer of this purple outfit is Lisa Hilton, who is world renowned now for her amazing work around fashion and hip hop and the convergence of the two. But when Lil' Kim wore this outfit, she wasn't empowering people. It was not body positive, right? So if you think back to the original Big Lily doll and the creation of the first Barbie, she came scantily clad, y'all. Like she was in a swimsuit, right? But it was empowering. But when Lil' Kim does it, it becomes is that appropriate for television? Is this blah, 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 blah? Now, many award shows later, we see lots of non-melanated actors, brothers and sisters, musicians who emulate this same kind of colored hair and matching outfits that are then fashion icons. But really, if you look up Mermaid Barbie, Lil' Kim is not too far off.
Yeah.
At all in this first picture, right? And so I think it's really, really important when we talk about the phenomenon of Barbie and how Barbie is supposed to empower so many people. It's supposed to be this cultural icon. Well, when those same characteristics of Barbie, like Ken being an afterthought, this highly consumeristic based thing, Barbie is always shopping. She's got her own dream house, yacht, car, microwave, whatever you want to call it. When that same level is exercised by Black women or Black girls, then it becomes inappropriate or grounds for highly sexualizing their bodies in ways that are just not appropriate at all.
Still, it's so ironic to me because the original Barbie, to me, and like when I looked at the original Barbie, the one that as they went through subsequent generations of the doll, to me, the original Barbie doesn't even look as much as sexualized as later versions of the American Barbie do. So it's still based on this prototype of the absolute sexualization and commodification of the female body, which is just, there's kind of no getting out of that, despite the spin of Barbie being basically embodying this kind of girl boss ethos, right, and stance. And I think part of the reason, I mean, also getting back to Sister Treya, what you were saying about the imagination gap and the country in 2023 having a conniption fit. Well, okay, we know over Halle Bailey playing The Little Mermaid. I think part of the reason why this notion of the Black Barbie and Black rappers kind of adopting this aesthetic is because it really first is very popularized within, right, the Black community and within the segment of the Black community that really consumes hip hop, actually. Next slide, please. Now, Nicki Minaj is very interesting. She very much models herself over time off of, I mean, she kind of starts out of the gate. It's kind of like a Black Barbie. And it's when I remember her debuting, and it gets really interesting when we also start to talk about the increasing popularity of anime, of manga, and of how, and cosplay, right? And so how Barbie continues to be reinvented with younger generations, but that now we're just, because of nostalgia, because of really even going back to the really overt, like resexualization of Barbie, but then also because of these different forms of play in our images, in our aesthetics, Nicki Minaj is really able to build a still strong career as a woman rapper, which is usually the lifespan of a woman rapper. You know, there's a lot in commentaries, is usually like 10 years. And when she came out of the gate, and I think her first song was this collab in 2009, yeah, around 2009, there really has been a gap for some time. I mean, it was very different from the early 90s up until at least the late 90s. I mean, you have the Queen Latifahs, you have the Moni Loves, you had the MC Light, you had even the West Coast, you had Yo-Yo, you had you had a number of Black women MCs and rappers, and that really dries up for some reason, you know, by the time that Nicki Minaj comes onto the scene. And even with Lil Kim, you have Foxy Brown, who is kind of seen as her main competition. And we also start seeing from a Queen Latifah and an MC Light or a Debrat who are fully clothed to rap about UNITY, actual empowerment of women. I'm not a bee or a hoe, or ladies first. In MC Light, everyone's covered up. Everyone's doing the, you know, the dancing in the 90s, especially even in the 80s with the creation of hip hop and b-boys. There were b-girls too. So everybody was dancing equally, quote unquote. Well, dancing was more unisexual in a way. And we start to see this increasing sexualization of women rappers. We don't see this when women first enter the hip hop arena, right? Just because women enter the hip hop arena does not mean that, oh, there's going to be this automatic sexualization because now women are rapping and women are emceeing. No, that's not what happens. So I think it's really fascinating to think about, why do we think we see this increasing sexualization of women MCs and rappers? And we really do start to see this with the Foxy Brown, with the Lil Kim. And Lil Kim was arguably a more successful rapper than Foxy Brown was. And so we see Nicki Minaj really taking a number of pages out of Lil Kim's book. And so her whole aesthetic is modeled off of a Black Barbie, to the blonde wig, the pink, and the pink clothing. And then we see an award show from earlier this year where she's got on the full pink wig, she's got on light blue contacts, and she does release a song entitled Barbie Teens this in 2018. And actually, she was brought in by the film itself. I believe this is the lead single off of the Barbie World soundtrack, the Barbie film soundtrack, which is Barbie World. And it's a collaboration with an up and coming rapper out of New York, also by the name of Ice Spice, who a lot of people are basically saying that this rapper benefits from colorism and from hypersexualization. Next slide, please. So this is a really interesting rabbit hole for me in particular, to see where has the imagery of Barbie, like where it has paid off for Black women, is clearly to some degree with Black women rappers. I would say that. I would also say, is this empowering, or is this just a remix of Barbie, right, as that emblem of white supremacist patriarchy? Because when we look at the hypersexualization and we look at the literal whitewashing that both Nicki Minaj and Lil Kim have partaken of over the course of several years and decades, it's in a way, they're making our argument for us is that ultimately they're aspiring to attain an impossible ideal that was never intended for any girls or women of color, and especially not intended for Black girls and women to be able to access. So we see over time what happens with the skin tone and with the features. Lil Kim has been very open and explicit about how she always felt that she was ugly. And in a succession of relationships with Black men, they would always cheat on her or end up choosing more ethnically ambiguous women, biracial women, et cetera, et cetera. And I actually tried to look up white fishing. There is no such thing as white fishing or whiteface in the same way that there is a such thing as blackface. And so for Black girls and women, it doesn't matter how much we try to attain that idealized beauty standard, we will never be able to attain it, right? No matter how much we bleach, no matter how many blonde wigs we wear, no matter how much we surgically alter our noses, our lips, because it serves a fundamentally exclusionary gatekeeping purpose to literally uphold white supremacy and anti-Blackness itself. Now, they've acquired some riches. They've acquired a lot of fame. So I guess, that's on the plus side of the ledger, I suppose. I'm going to turn it over to you, Sister Treya.
So I'm over here because I'm like, what was the off? I think this section here is a much larger conversation about maybe not necessarily like connecting them to Barbie, but what they had to give up, right? So the scholar Dr. Yabablay had this essay about what would we have told the young little Kim before she started to change her appearance. And what would we have said to a Nicki Minaj when she was first coming out? And quite frankly, I still think it's brilliant, even if other folks don't think so. But I think like that's a part of a larger conversation about how what it costs them ultimately that we can't cover here as it relates to Barbie. But I do want to say that of these two, Nicki Minaj is considered like she embodies the Barbie theme a little bit more, but she didn't just stop there in her portrayal of that. Like she also did some gender bending as well when she had like the other part of her, which was Roman,
the alter ego. Yeah,
absolutely. So I think LBE have us back for that conversation. But I do want to say, like, even though they may have made money, like I'm always conscious of what does it cost? What did it cost Little Kim? What did it cost to Nicki Minaj? And they're not on the screen, but what did this cost Meg Thee Stallion? Who can't nobody tell me that is not my little niece, but what did it cost to Meg Thee Stallion? Even with Queen Latifah, Moni Love, Roxanne Shante.
Yes.
What did it cost them to like imagine themselves more than what society would allow them to box themselves in? Where they, especially Roxanne Shante, who was getting hit with all kinds of like sexual innuendos and violence because she was simply good at what she did. Right. And so according to Ruth Handler, her idea behind creating Barbie, and we can actually go to the next slide because this kind of falls into that. When we talk about Barbie and Black women in particular, Ruth's issue with the deficit in the market space, or this imaginary gap, if you will, was that it didn't allow her daughter or herself. Now, mind you, just some background information, Ruth and her husband were handling business at Mattel, basically handling business. Ruth's invention of Barbie in the first year made like $500,000, right? The next year, they were at like $500 million, which places Mattel as a Fortune 500 company, right? And so even with all of that, Ruth could not break the glass ceiling. The ironic part about that is that in her fight to break that glass ceiling, her analysis did not include women of color or Black women. And I say those very differently.
Yes.
At all. So the desire was to present a different form of, or to hand down a different representation of womanhood. But I would argue it's actually white womanhood, right? Because Barbie only represented an imaginary or a fantastical imagination space for those who looked like her. Mm-hmm. And so the lack of creation of a Black Barbie or a Barbie who just happened to be Black, however you want to put that, the first one doesn't come, an actual demarcated Black Barbie or Christie doesn't even arrive on the scene until 1968. And she arrives after Halliday. So if we go to the next slide, this brilliant scholar, Halliday, talks about how the creator of the Black Barbie was after Mattel aligns themselves with like Schindler Toys or something. And I'm barking on the name, so forgive me. But Schindler was this group that basically in Swahili means competition. They were like, we are trying to create dolls and playthings for children, for Black children, so they can see themselves. Now, the really important thing about here is that play was not often afforded to Black children. Play in Black children was not afforded. I'm going to say that very clearly because Black children were not considered children or afforded childhood for a very long time unless you were in certain socioeconomic rungs in the society. So even your play is different, right? And so Schindler, this toy company, was like, look, we need toys that actually empower and allow our Black children to see themselves. Well, when you look at Barbie through the years, you don't even get a representative Barbie until almost the 2000s. Like it's like 90s, 2000s, right? So on the screen here, you can see two images of Barbie. These are, and I pulled these from the 90s. Both of them are basically cut from the same mold. The only difference is that Black Barbie, the Black Barbie here, which I believe is Malibu Barbie, the resin that she's created from is brown, and her eyeshadow is different, right? Right. And so I wish I had gotten a closer up picture so you could even see the nose features and the characteristics. So even when we're talking about Handler creating this empowerment tool, really what she did is she created a toy that mirrors society. And at the time, and still constantly, y'all, up until like, I think 2018, we didn't even change the shape of Barbie. So there's a beautiful and very interesting documentary in 2018. I think it's called Reshaping Shoulders or Rethinking Barbie. It's essentially rethinking Barbie. I think that's the last part of it. And essentially, it was about this company coming out with different body shapes for Barbie, and the backlash behind, oh my gosh, you're promoting obesity. Barbie was never like a realistic, like she does not have realistic body measurements. And so in 2018, when they actually rolled this line out, there was a lot of backlash. But the more important thing here from this slide is it's not until 2009 where we actually get a set of Barbie dolls created by Mattel. They were not called Barbie dolls. They were called Sew in Style. And it was created by Irby is the last name. But from 2009 to 2015, this is where this line of dolls came in. So please Google it. It's fascinating. Even the whole style, the facial characteristics, the hair type, right? Corn silk is not growing out of our hair. And if it does, great for you, but that's not, indicative. But these dolls actually represented the diaspora. Now you might ask yourself, what was happening between 2009 and 2015? And if you said the Obama years, you would be correct, right? So next slide, please. this leads us to this idea when we're creating Black Barbies that Holiday is saying, like, they're created not intentionally, but they're created through embodied objectification. And so this is really just the process of commercializing Blackness. That's all it is. So you're not really buying a Black Barbie doll. You're buying something that appears to be Black that I can actually identify with, right? And so that's all. The other part of that is using Black symbolic power, and this is the use of Black women and girls, consumers deliberately using those images, sounds, aesthetics that resonate within Black communities, as well as the ideologies that undergird our ideals, to sell us things. So are you really getting a toy that's actually empowering you, or are you getting a company who's like, what are Black people doing right now? What's hot in the Black community right now? What's going on in pop culture? How can we commercialize that? And then using Black women to be like, look, we created a doll that looks like you. Look, we created a shirt that looks like you. I just, one of the things I remember is, like, during the great sit down in this country, summer 2020, where you had companies who had commercialized Black Lives Matter socks. And we're selling those socks to be like, show that you support Black Lives Matter. But it's ultimately that's not going back to the community. But so they are using the embodied objectification of Blackness to sell us things. And so, if you're interested in this, definitely get Holiday's book. Definitely look at the, that documentary on rethinking, like, Barbie, to really understand that when we're offering critiques about, or when we change Barbie, or what we know of Barbie, who's supposed to be this cultural icon, this universalizing symbol, who's supposed to, like, rah behind the girls, if you are not careful, you will lose yourself into believing that Barbie represents all women. And that's not necessarily true historically, and certainly not these days as well. So those are the ends of my slides. Sister Lewis, if y'all want to come back and ask questions, we definitely welcome y'all's questions as well.
Yes.
Well, I have questions. I have so many questions. Miss Bernadine, did you have something that you wanted to start with?
Can we jump into a little discussion about Barbie and her careers and her material things that she obtained, that and the fact that we're not sure from one year to the other, or one season to another, exactly what is Barbie doing to make a living? Can we talk about that? And that's kind of what set this this topic in motion, because I went on a long tangent about, you're an astronaut, you're a medical doctor, you have a 4-story townhome, you have a sports car, a camper, and I wonder if we could just talk a little bit about what's really going on. And I'm being, I know you all know me, so I'm being very reserved in how I'm saying this. But given the history of Barbie, her birth, and then let's move it up to how she is maintaining her lifestyle. Can we talk about it for a little bit?
I want to jump in really quickly and set it up for Sister Treya, like an alley-oop. So I love what you said about, well, obviously Ruth Handler was filling this imagination gap, and it was introducing and envisioning a variation on white womanhood that had not existed up to that time in the 50s. I mean, I was even looking up where Barbie was also a CEO of what, I don't know. But like when I was reading an article where one woman was looking up women CEOs, and a CEO Barbie who's literally named CEO Barbie pops up. So then I want to also piggyback off of what Sister Treya is, how Sister Treya is framing, especially the introduction of Black Barbies at these really specific historical moments. So I think looking at the combination of what Ruth Handler's initial intent was, with also really understanding that affirmative action created as a direct result of the civil rights movement, the greatest beneficiaries have always been and continue to be white women. So there has been this massive, in a sense, like affirmative action really has been it's been largely gender-based affirmative action for white folks. And so you have this influx of white women having the world opened up to them when it comes to being able to pursue post-secondary degrees, look at their numbers of any sector, any institution, and also look at even wage gaps that a lot of times we only frame the wage gap conversation in, oh, but women make this less, this much on the dollar versus what a white man or what a man makes. But what we need to disaggregate it more. The top 2 wage earners in the country are first white men, then white women, and then we can go from there in terms of everyone else across gender and across race. So in a way, Barbie is keeping up with this opening of the floodgates of professional opportunity for white women to enter the workforce, literally on the backs of affirmative action, but then also being at the forefront of dismantling it once they've gotten through the door.
It takes me a minute because I'm like, yes to all of that. And I want to go back to an LBE, like at the very beginning, where we talk about the tropes of Black womanhood, right? So Barbie gets to be all these things, and those things are unencumbered by her life choices. Like I said, Ken is in the periphery. Ken is a little dangling ornament, right? But the moment that Black women, Black girls imagine themselves to be something more than just a sports player, whatever your just is, then we start putting tropes on that, right? Oh, she's strong. She's a magical Black girl. She's all of these other things. And so I think that Barbie, in a very real way, all these careers that she has been allowed to cycle through and have, really points to this idea of, like, when we're talking about this fantastical playground, right? So fantastical playground, that is Halliday's work as well, that it's only allowed, you are only allowed to try on those things if you look like Barbie, and not the Black one, not Christy, not Nikki, not the Black version of Ken, which I can never remember his name. I'm sorry. But that heroism, or the idea that you can have these many things, is only born by people who look like the original Barbie. And that is highly problematic for 2 reasons. Because while white women were protecting the cult of domesticity and making sure that they were aligned, and they, essentially out here upholding white supremacy, Black women and Black communities and other communities of color didn't have a choice, right? We were in college doing things because our communities needed to survive. And that's why you have the influx of Black teachers and Black scientists and what have you. We did not have the luxury of choosing from one day to the next of, what do I want to be? And for a lot of us who were talking about, we're feminists, as soon as you all walked through that door, you closed it on the rest of us. And you wanted, there's a Carter instituted this, like, International Women's Summit in the United States in 1977. All these women came together from across the country. They had like a 3-page plaque out of like 700 and some odd pages that pertain specifically to women of color. When women of color get this plaque, or Black women get this plaque, they're like, this doesn't work at all for us. And they start listing things like, we want pay equity, we want to be able to raise our children, we want the absolute, we don't want to be discriminated against in the workplace. And so I say this lovingly because we reversed affirmative action that was not created for women of color. It was created for white women. He that hath an ear, do the research and come back to us. As soon as they walk through the door, as soon as oh girl who used to be at Facebook telling everyone to lean in, well, we've been leaning in for a while. Not only have we been leaning in, but a lot of us have been leaning in, and you've been walking across our backs to become whoever it is that you want to be while leaving us in the dirt. And then you turn back and you say crazy stuff like, why don't you just pull yourself up by your bootstraps? So it's very interesting to me that this new Barbie movie, which I have not seen fully yet, I'm going to finish watching it this afternoon, was very intentional on being multicultural. But are we actually getting to the root of why does Barbie get to have all these careers? And why is it just in the 21st century that we're trying to be intentional about this? So that's all I wanted to add to that.
I actually want to build on that conversation in question, because I had a question that was really talking about the parallel between some of the historical Barbie series, so like the classic beauties that were done in the 90s of Elizabeth Taylor, Grace Kelly, Marilyn Monroe, those figures. And then it's not until like really the past 2 years that they have the, I think it's called the Inspiring Women series, where you start seeing the historical figures like Ida B. Wells, Maya Angelou, Madam C.J. Walker. And so my initial question was about the parallel between like beauty and inspiration, and why there's a difference between white representation and Black representation there. But in this conversation about the careers, I'm also curious about the parallel between, or the difference that's being drawn between white women's vision for the future and what's being cast as kind of a Black woman's past of possibility, is how I wrote it down. It's like our possibilities are limited to what we've been versus the historical representation of Barbie that was focused on what women could be, but only a certain type of women, if that makes sense.
And Sister Kara, please let me throw this in there. Christy, when Christy gets introduced into the Barbie club, the Barbie friendships, we have Christy, and then Christy comes about a year later, then a little miniature little baby shows up, and it's Christy's sister. And my parents were like, well, where's Christy's mom and dad to take care of Christy's sister? So no, you won't get the little baby Christy or whoever this is, because that's not right. And so when I'm listening to you talk about the careers and the collection, one that focuses on the beauty of Hollywood, and the other one, well, we as Black women who have saved the world. Then they have to insert in there, but correct me if I'm wrong, that's why I'm bringing this up, Christy with a little sister that everyone knew clearly that was her baby.
I don't think that I ever conceptualized the little baby as Christy's daughter until this very moment. But also, full disclosure, I grew up in the Southwest, so Black dolls, period, Cabbage Patch Kids, Baby Alives, Barbie dolls, it was very rare to see them. And if you ever saw commercials, there was like the blonde hair girl who was like role playing or cosplaying the Barbie doll. But then it was like her black friend who was like off to the left with the Christy or Nikki doll, depending. But I don't think I ever conceptualized that the little baby as Christy's child until this very moment. Mind blown.
But imagine for the wise elders in our community who got that. At least that's how they took that. That why should Christy have to drag around her little sister? And Barbie's about having fun. We're in the camper. We're going this place. We're doing this. I'm flying to the moon, whatever. And then your one black friend has to show up with a little one. Why couldn't Christy have free time? She has to babysit and have fun with Barbie. I'm just saying, just putting something out there for thought.
But I also think it speaks to what Kara was talking about like being beautiful versus impactful or like what is it, Kara? Is it impressive, whatever it is?
Yeah, inspiring.
Inspiring, right? Oh, Chrissy takes care of her sister. That's so inspiring. Meanwhile, Barbie is like, I want to go shopping. Do you want to come? And I think that was an actual like recorded message on the Talking Barbie. So I think that also speaks to like this idea that we believe. I said this to my good friend, Dr. Howard, also a friend of LBE today, about how we have already mammied little Black girls who play with Barbie dolls anyway, because they're socialized to take care of Barbie stuff. We protect Barbie stuff. In the real world, what that looked like was if I'm playing with Jenna and Jenna is like, you'll play this Barbie. And I'm like, no, I don't want to play that Barbie. I don't assert myself because Jenna's dad is my father's boss. And me pissing off Jenna could potentially cause my father to lose his job. Right. And so I think this topic is it's so much more than that. But then I get to be inspirational. I don't get to be considered, like, I don't think I've seen any Barbie commercial where the Black girl is centered, unless the Barbie was like Brandy, the Brandy Barbie doll. And I don't even think that was a Barbie doll. I think Hasbro like created that. But we're never allowed to be centered as beauty. And just because it still irks me to this day, the classical beauty, I just remember when Hollywood tried to convince us that Elizabeth Taylor was Queen Cleopatra. I remember that distinctly. Like, y'all tried it because, again, like, we want Black parts, but not Black people. So this idea we can be inspirational. Oh, look at how they help. Look at how they do this. Look at how blah, 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 blah. But we're never like, you can be president.
You know, one of the other things that stood out to me in just the difference between some of these Barbie series is, I mean, if you look at the Ida B. Wells doll and you look at the Maya Angelou doll and you look at the Madam C.J. Walker doll, they all look remarkably similar with different hair. Versus if you look at Elizabeth Taylor, Grace Kelly, Marilyn Monroe, those figures, they were very intentional about actually representing their features and being true to the looks of them, to the point that, like, they had a whole lot of controversy because one of the Elizabeth Taylor dolls had brown eyes by accident, and they specifically advertised that it would have her trademark violet eyes. So I'm wondering your thoughts on the apparent ability to create those distinguishable European beauty standards versus the apparent inability to create distinguishable Black features and representation in that. How, like for our dolls, we are more traditionally almost, it's like playing dress up. The doll itself is playing dress up of Black representation because they can't be true to that image
Mhm.
versus the white doll actually representing who it's supposed to represent.
Yeah, I think this is a great question. I mean, I think it goes back to the overarching kind of framing of the conversation around to uphold white supremacy is to invest those who look a particular way, in this case, Barbie, in this case, the series of classic Hollywood beauties, which also could have included Black actresses from Hollywood. We can start with Dorothy Dandridge and Lena Horne, as much as colorism is at play there, but it means that whiteness itself is invested with full humanity. It's invested with full personhood. So what that means is they are invested with their individuality. They are invested with having these very precise, true to life depictions down to the eye color versus everyone else. And specifically, I mean, specifically with Black people, I mean, it just takes, and Black women in particular, um, being completely decentered when it comes to any kind of constructions of mainstream beauty. And this is worldwide. I mean, we can look at the phenomena of skin bleaching around the globe, around the planet. And really, that old expression that all Black people look alike, it's not that we all look alike, it's that even in the imaginary, you cannot run the risk, or these, like a company that produces these kinds of toys is at the same time engaging in embodied objectification just as a money grab. But as simultaneously, they are still upholding anti-Blackness and white supremacy because they're not investing the series of quote unquote inspiring women, which one of them in their pinky toe had more of an impact than all of the women in the classic beauty series combined. Let's just start there. They actually fulfill and literally embody Ruth Handler's initial intention for Barbie, but they're still completely divested of their full humanity because it's the same face and it's the same body with maybe some variation in the hair and just having to even name them. Otherwise, how would you even tell them apart? Who even knows what Ida B. Wells actually looks like? I know what she looks like. But like in mainstream society, even among Black folks, who knows what she actually looks like? So that's not surprising to me
Can I just
at all.
also add in here that there's a social and there's a cognitive thing that happens here. It's called the other race effect, right? So the Black presenting women in this screen, y'all all look different to me. But if I'm watching Hallmark, I sometimes cannot tell the difference between a white female lead in one show from the other, right? And so I also just want to add in the psychology in here as well. Now, we're not sure if this is bias or whatever it is, but we've all, every Black woman has had the experience where we have been confused with another Black woman that we look nothing alike. Um, and so to me, after looking up these Barbies, I was like, dang, they all look like they just have different wigs on. That to me also shows a lack of research in whoever created that Barbie. They were not intentional in actually capturing the faces. And I'm also like, why are all these Black women smiling? I have never seen a picture of Ida B. Wells smiling, ever. We also know that that's a psychological phenomenon too, that if we don't smile, and if you're a Black woman, then clearly you're hostile, you're aggressive, or something is about to go off. I don't feel safe. She's so aggressive. So I think it's two things, right? So this natural tendency, and everyone does it, right? And I'm gonna be very transparent. I can't tell you the male lead, protagonist lead in many of the Hallmark movies that I watch during Countdown to Christmas. I cannot. They all look the same. But also, if I'm interested enough, I'm like, now who is that person? I really like that line that they said. I'm gonna go IMDb that to figure out who it is, right? And that's the intention behind it. So we know it's a human thing, but I think that's also why. But even in constructing those dolls and they're like slightly smiling, I don't know of a single picture of Harriet Tubman that is smiling. And I know a researcher who's been looking for that one picture for ages. The closest we have gotten is using AI to have her chuckle at the stuff that happened down in Alabama. So we're still like putting onto a Black inspirational Barbie like characteristics that still make us feel good. Oh, look, in the 21st century, in the last 3 years, we've given Black folks inspirational figures. Quite honestly, make me a Meg Thee Stallion Barbie doll. I'll buy that. Honestly, I would.
With the knees, with the special needs.
So one of the other things that I remember just over the past decade, I want to say a few times, we've seen, especially it's young Black girls who are highlighted for having created their own doll series that are like truly representational, and often featuring like natural hair, and that being the important characteristic for them. And what is really interesting to me in that is how short lived that attention is, because often, very shortly after they create that series of dolls, here comes a Mattel or a Hasbro with here's a new Black series of dolls with this one now has an afro, or this one you can braid her hair, or those sorts of things. So I feel like there's kind of two narratives that are happening there. First is um, what should be celebrated, which is that creative and innovative ability of even very young Black girls to create and visualize and self define their own representation. But then the parallel conversation or narrative there is the tendency of society to overtake that creativity, to put it back into an acceptable box and like the traditional power system. So I'm curious about everyone's thoughts on that. Why does that happen and why does it happen so quickly?
Because everything Black people do, specifically Black girls, is ghetto until proven profitable. I hate to say it that way, right? But it is, right? So I'm thinking about door knocker earrings. I'm thinking about the algorithms of braids in our hair that were more than just an aesthetic for us, and how it was like, oh, that's unkempt. That's not professional. Until you see a Bo Derek, a Kim Kardashian, and any of these other non-melanated folks that don't belong to this community in particular, right? I think about the girls who figured out how to create tint for their lips with an eyeliner and some Vaseline, and then MAC came out with gloss MAC, right? With the tint thing. So all of it was ghetto until it was proven profitable. And I think that's what you see. The same thing happens with Mattel and the Chandela. I'm so sorry, y'all. I'm going to get it right and put it in the chat. That same thing happens where Mattel gives this company $500,000, and you look at the history and you're like, well, what was the purpose of that? Well, Mattel was essentially trying to figure out, how do I commodify Blackness and sell it back to Black folks? And we see this all the time. And if I could just be really, really clear when we talk about what should we be celebrating, why does it feel like that happens all the time? It's the commodification of Blackness. But I wanna walk us back to the Live Black experience about Kwanzaa and Kujichagulia in particular, about self-definition and why that is so important. Y'all, when one of these babies comes out with a great product that celebrates them, this is how they envision themselves, we have to get behind it. We have to. And we cannot say, but it costs so much. Yes, but they don't have a Fortune 500 company backing them. And a lot of times it's just these kids or a creative in their house who are doing these things. And so if we're really going to embody Kwanzaa all the year long, like, we can offer critique, but what are we going to bring to the table? And it really is going to require us not just self-defining ourselves, but also Ujamaa, cooperative economics, right? So maybe I can't purchase your product, but maybe I share it, those sorts of things. And I think that's how we can, like, push that even further, because the more that we allow folks to come in and corporate raid our brilliance and sell it back to us, we're going to keep having these conversations. But commodification of Blackness.
I'm just going to add the exclamation point: colonizers gonna colonize.
I want to circle back to a question from the audience. It's actually from our LBE coordinator, Miss Kimberly Robinson. She asked, could the sexualization of Black girls possibly stem from fear from the Black community, considering the abuse our young girls have encountered historically? And could the different standards, playing a bit of devil's advocate, be flipped positively to indicate that our standards for Black girls are higher than others?
Can you say it one more time, Kara?
Yeah. So could the sexualization of Black girls possibly stem from fear from the Black community, considering the abuse our young girls have encountered historically? And could the different standards, playing a bit of devil's advocate, be flipped positively to indicate that our standards for Black girls are higher than others?
Got it. I mean, I'll jump in really quickly. I absolutely, the policing of the sexuality of Black girls definitely, it is definitely multi-layered, and that happens, and it has been taking place within the Black community for generations. I mean, I will say that, I have this conversation. I'm gonna get a little bit. It's very nuanced to understand that. I think in part it's coming from a protective vantage point. It's definitely a legacy of American chattel slavery. It's definitely a component of, or an element of, post-traumatic slave syndrome that Joy DeGruy goes into in detail in her book by the same name. And it was because of the stereotype and the really, I mean, horrific justification of the systemic rape of Black women's, we'll talk about Black women because it was happening with Black men too, but of not only enslaved Black women for nearly 250 years, but also of the descendants of American chattel slavery, I mean, to the current day. So the stereotype that was used to justify this systemic brutalization was that Black girls and women were animalistic, that they had uncontrollable sexual urges, that they were innately promiscuous, and that they wanted to be having sex with any and everybody. I mean, that's literally the stereotype that was used to justify this whole scale, I mean, the literal pillaging, raping, and plundering of Black bodies, and of Black girls and women in particular. And what's always deep to me is then one of the obsessions around, let's just talk about the abolition of slavery to the desegregation of institutions and restaurants and public schools as the white man's constant obsession with the animalistic, uncontrollable black man whose main objective in life was to rape white women. I mean, that's where we get white womanhood as the justification for the oldest white supremacist domestic terrorist organization in the country, the Ku Klux Klan. We can look at The Birth of a Nation, released in 1915, was basically, for all intents and purposes, a recruiting film for the Ku Klux Klan, and it was all framed around this notion of we must protect white womanhood at all costs against the out of control black man who lusts right after white women. So there's like so much to the over sexualization or hypersexualization of black girls and women. The black community, I would also play devil's advocate, really surveils black girls and women's sexuality. I mean, well, sexual expression and gender identity expression across the board. But unfortunately, at the same time, it also blames black girls and women in this like internalizing of that stereotype that drives white supremacy, blaming black girls and women for the abuse that they are subjected to, like I'm talking about within black communities. And we can talk about respectability politics as well. We can talk about black church gender politics as well, like a la Beyonce's Church Girl song. But it's complicated, right? It's really complicated. And in terms of, does that mean that then within the black community there are higher standards? I wouldn't say that there are higher expectations of black girls and women, unfortunately. I would say that it's very oppressive, actually. The policing of black girls and black women's sexuality is very oppressive in many ways. And it reinstates white supremacist patriarchy in particular interesting ways. And I think that anything short of black girls and women having full agency over our own sexuality and sexual expression, I mean, I think anything short of that is oppressive and it's problematic. And it actually is stemming directly from colonialism itself, because these mores absolutely were not the norm in pre-colonial, like if we look at pre-colonial continent of Africa, for example. Victorian England, they were the norm. They weren't the norm on the continent. They weren't the norm over here, right? So I think it's a really important question. And I think that's a whole different topic.
I want to close us out with just we've talked a lot about the origins of Barbie and what it represented and what it still in many ways represents. And I'm remembering being 11 or 12 years old myself and seeing the first launch of some of the earliest multicultural Barbie series and what a big deal that was. But I'm going to ask this question knowing kind of what the answer is or what I expect the answer to be. The question is that really the goal? Should our goal be to see ourselves represented and our young Black girls represented in and through the Barbie legacy? Or do we have a higher or a different direction to be aiming in?
I think that at one point, I think this question is multi-pronged. At one point, and as a goalpost, right, towards complete liberation, representation was key. But we're at a point right now where we are beyond representation. And it feels like this is just me. I'm talking about me. I'm not talking about nobody else. That we have a lot of people who are like, representative. Great, we got representatives. But not all of us who are being represented are also being cared for. So I think that we are past the goal of representation. We've achieved it in some ways, in other ways that we have not. It is the most surface level action that we can take at this point. But at one point, this was an important goal because there weren't any Black dolls, right, of substantive worth. I think that we're beyond that now. What's the next step that gets us to, like, I'm a teacher, right? So if I think about outcome, if the outcome is liberation and representation was only one part of that, where do we need to go next? I'm gonna tell you, the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. So it is going to be really important for us as a community to stop waiting for representation. Some of us have to just get out here, hand to plow, and be what we could not see. And that is a direct quote from Lucille Clifton, who basically was like, come and celebrate me. It's a poem. She said, why don't you come and celebrate me? Every day something has tried to kill me and I've survived. I could not see anything but myself. Born woman, born of Babylon. What choice did I have but to do it? And I think that that's kind of where we are, is that some of us are going to have to hand to plow, just start becoming what we cannot see, and stop waiting for someone. I'm not waiting for a Mattel to say, you know what, Treya, you're really valuable. We are going to find you somebody. We're going to create a Barbie doll that has no hair, who's impacted by an autoimmune disorder, so that you can feel represented. I'm not looking for that anymore. But what I am looking for is to invest in folks who are already doing this work in my community, right? And I think another step from that is to hype your own stuff, right? I'm not talking about stuff that is janky and not performed well and all that stuff. But the next goal is to hype your own stuff. We can't continue to believe that the grass on the other side is much greener and nicer and warmer, because that's the other thing that we do. We tend to regress. I'm not buying that, it's too expensive. And it's not even like this. Why buy this? And I can go to whatever store, fill in the blank, right? And so I think that, like, at one point, representation was important. But now what? That's me, Dr. Roaf.
That's I'm not even going to try to follow all that up. Yeah. Now what? We're on to the next. We are on to the next.
Well, thank you both, and thank you, Reverend Dr. Bernadine Lewis, for your conversation and for engaging in this conversation. And I'm just going to tell the audience, I said that because, during the conversation, I think I often referred to you as just Miss Bernadine, but you have titles before your name and you've earned them, and I just wanted to acknowledge it. So thank you for this conversation. It was insightful, it was inspiring, it was thoughtful, and I'm going to be thinking about it for the rest of the night. I'm still not going to see that movie, but I do have a documentary that I need to watch. So thank you, Dr. Allen, for that suggestion as well. Dr. Bernadine, would you like to close us out as you do?
Oh, I can, and thank you for the acknowledgement, Councilwoman Carol. I think when we come in this space, we're sisters who are just trying to bring a message of enlightenment, encouragement to uplift our people, to uplift the community as a whole. But first, I think that healing has to begin here at home with us, with our people. And so as we're bringing this to an end for this evening, I do agree that we have got to get back to um, empowering ourselves and looking within ourselves and to ourselves. Um, because we may never see the Barbie that looks exactly like us. I'm longing for a full figured Barbie. Um, I'm longing for a Barbie that looks like Tasha. And I think when I say Tasha, I see a smile because we all have in mind what that Tasha doll would look like. Um, but we look in our communities, and I see all of us. I see our ancestors. I see us as we have come forward and progressed. And that's what we've got to begin to look at. And I see really Barbie. I don't know how much longer Barbie can last, because what does an influencer Barbie look like? Um, so I'm like, enjoy it, Barbie, because I don't foresee you being around much longer. And so I like what Sister Dr. Allen has given us this evening about we have to look within ourselves, and we have to look at each other and begin to celebrate us and all the many different us's that we are. And so bringing this wonderful conversation to an end. We certainly wish that the community will take this and begin to talk about it amongst themselves, um, and begin to possibly. I think we can kind of celebrate the demise of Barbie, and maybe we'll come back with some sort of ritual for that. But I love us, and we have been beautiful since the beginning of time. We are the beginning of time. And so, to our LBE supporters, our family, our community, our accomplices, we say, go in grace.